Okay, this isn't scripted. I really don't know what to say, but I thought I would show a pair of my angelfish spawning. This is the very start of the event. They're making practice runs now. You see the female there making a practice run. You can tell she's a female because the spawning tubes, the tubes that come out their belly area, I know that's not very scientific, but so the layman can understand. You can see it really pronounced on a female. The female's egg depositor, they call it an ovipositor, is pretty thick and it's pretty easy to see. The tube for the male is considerably smaller. In fact, it's pretty hard to see if you're not really paying attention. This is the only actual way I know of how to sex an angelfish. When they're spawning, you can definitely tell male from female. All the other ways, if somebody tells you that they can tell without seeing them spawn, they're guessing. There is no sexual dimorphism, meaning there's no difference in the sexes except in sexual organs. So you can see the female there. When they're making practice runs, the male really isn't too interested. He really doesn't want to start doing his job till he actually sees eggs on the slate. It's just something they do, so don't panic if you see your angelfish, they're in a spawning event and they're making runs but you're not seeing any eggs. Don't panic, because they can do this for quite a long time before you actually start seeing any eggs being placed. Okay, I skipped about, I don't know, about 5 minutes worth of video. They're, again, just doing their practice runs. I apologize for the dirty glass, by the way. I never realized how dirty this tank was until I started filming. But you can finally see that she just made her first run where she actually deposited some eggs. And then you can see the male come over and look, and now the male is actually interested in what's going on. He's checking out the eggs, making sure they were there, and then he'll start making his runs too. Okay, spawning media, or what you're going to place in their tank for them to lay their eggs on. I'm kind of putting this in after the fact. You can see the slate I'm using. It's long and narrow. It's easily purchased from a particular angelfish breeder that's very popular on the internet. There are other things you can use, though. There are spawning cones. Some people use terracotta pots. But for the most part, angelfish are going to like something at an angle. You can see the passes they're making. This is generally the attitude or pitch of what they like to spawn on. That being said, they can spawn on anything. They're really good at spawning on intake tubes for power filters. They're great at spawning on heaters. I've even had them spawn on the airline tubing going to a filter. They might surprise you. However, if you give them a bare bottom tank with not a lot of options and you put something in going at it's not a 45-degree angle, it's much more than that. Generally that's what they're going to pick to lay their eggs on. However, I have had one pair that just no matter what I put in the tank, they said, screw it, I'm spawning on the glass. So it's definitely an individual preference per angelfish, but if you get a spawning slate like this, I'm not going to mention any companies or anything, but generally most of your pairs will spawn on a particular slate set up like this. Okay, well, you'll definitely see it's more of this. This is pretty much what takes place. It's just pass after pass. Spawn times can vary depending on your particular pair of angelfish. I've seen this done in less than an hour, and I've also had pairs that take all night. I don't know what factors affect spawn times. Here I did a little bit of zooming in. You can see the female's ovipositor, and you can see just how big and thick it is, which is a lot different than the males. So there you can see an egg got laid. Sorry. There you can see well, you could there for a second. You can see the male's sperm duct, and you can see how much smaller it is than the female's ovipositor. Any eggs that don't get stuck to the slate will generally get eaten. They have no qualms about eating their own eggs, but I don't want to call it a shell, but the egg casing itself is rather sticky. So even if it doesn't initially stick to the slate, it may roll down and stick a little lower. Doesn't happen a lot, but occasionally it does. Trying to get the camera to zoom on autofocus sometimes is a challenge, especially with as dirty as that glass is. Again, I apologize. One of the questions I get quite a bit is, how do you get a proven pair? How do you get a pair of angels that are going to spawn for you? And there's two different methods. The first method, which is quite a bit more expensive, but you get results right away, is to buy a proven pair from a breeder. In this case, that's exactly what I did. These fish were purchased by a local breeder here. I prefer buying from local breeders because they're using the same kind of water as you are. In my particular case, I'm using Lake Michigan water, which isn't really conducive to angelfish per se. You get your fish from a local breeder from local water that these fish are used to. Whereas if I maybe went from a breeder that's not local or is using an RO unit with really soft water, I may not have as quick success, you know, trying to acclimate fish to my water conditions. Anyways, that's a whole nother story. The other method of getting a proven pair of angelfish is just to simply buy 5 or 6 or 8 or as many as you can afford of baby angels that you like, and keep them together and let them pair off naturally. This is generally a cheaper way of going about things, because individual younger angelfish are going to be a lot cheaper than buying a proven pair. Depending on the quality of your angels, you can expect to pay over $100 for a good proven pair of angelfish, depending on your source. Whereas, you know, going to your local pet shop and buying some, you know, 50-cent size angels are going to be a lot cheaper. But then you have to take the time to grow them out and get them to where they're sexually mature, and hopefully you can get a pair that like each other enough to spawn. Okay, one of the other questions I get is, you know, other people I know, they have angelfish and they just won't spawn. Sorry about that in the background. While I was filming this, I was also doing water changes, so I apologize for the water running in the background. So, what to say about getting your angels to spawn? A good quality pair of angelfish, like this particular pair, they spawned for me every 2 weeks. I didn't have to do anything special to them, just give them a good quality flake food and the occasional treat of some frozen bloodworms, things like that. For any fish, it doesn't matter whether they're angelfish or not, any fish is going to benefit from a good quality diet and what you feed them. Your end results are going to be a lot better if you're going with good quality foods. Although I do know people that have had very good luck with just feeding a straight standard flake. It happens. Most of the standard flakes on the market today are pretty good food, but sometimes a pair of angelfish will need a trigger of some kind. They generally may not spawn for you, but they're looking for a trigger. I've had angelfish that I've had to do this with, and one of my favorite ways to get them to spawn is raise your temperature up. You know, when it comes to angelfish, don't be afraid of temperature. 86 degrees is nothing for these fish. So go ahead, raise the temperature, and give them a good quality diet. And when you see that they're nice and plump and they're really looking good, do a heavy water change with cooler water. And I mean, go ahead and drop as far down as like 72 degrees. That influx of cooler water kind of makes them feel like a large rain event has happened, You know, these fish come from South America, so influx of new cooler water usually means it's time to spawn, and occasionally that'll do it. In fact, quite often, there's quite a few pairs that, you know, to really get them to spawn, you need to do that massive water change. That cooler water is a fantastic trigger to get them to spawn. The cool part about getting your fish from a local breeder and a proven pair is you can actually talk to the breeder and say, well, how often do these guys spawn? If you're starting out, maybe you should go with an easier pair. Like I said, this pair here, I did nothing special to them except good quality food, and they spawned every 2 weeks. I've also gotten fish from the same breeder that I failed miserably with, and I could only get one spawn out of the pair. So it's definitely an individual pair type thing, and doing those massive water changes is at least something to try, especially if you're just struggling and you've had an adult pair for quite a while and they've never spawned. It's definitely something to try. Okay, so now your angelfish have laid a bunch of eggs. Now what do? You have two options. You can leave the spawning slate in with the parents and let nature take its course. I personally do not do that. As well as I know that this particular pair came from a guy that removed his eggs. Sometimes angelfish aren't the best parents in the world, especially if they come out of the pet trade. They just don't have the genetic memories, if that's actually a word, but they just don't have the skill to be great parents. Mainly because their parents weren't great. They were probably removed and raised artificially. It's a common practice in the pet hobby. So you can try either way. I personally remove the eggs. So this is how I go about it. Once this spawn is done, I remove the eggs to a rearing tank. And the biggest advice I have to go, if you're going to use a rearing tank, or remove the eggs and put them in another vessel to be hatched out. I really don't like the word hatched, but I'll explain that later. My biggest advice is it must be meticulously clean. Believe me, I've made mistakes, I've had microscopic invaders, and they will ruin a batch of angel eggs so fast it ain't even funny. So make sure whatever kind of container you're using when you remove this slate, it absolutely has to be meticulously clean. So anyways, then once this spawn is done, I'll just physically remove the whole slate, and I'll put it in a 2.5 gallon tank with a sponge filter, a pretty much brand new sponge filter, or one that's really, really clean. And I'll put the slate next to the air bubbles coming out of the filter. And that keeps water kind of moving around the eggs. if you leave the eggs in with the parents, they will constantly fan them with their pectoral fins, and that just keeps the water moving around, keeps fresh oxygenated water around the eggs. And generally in like 5 days or so, these eggs don't really hatch. It's not like a chicken egg where boom, out pops this chicken. The fish, the body of the fish generally develops around the egg, where if you think of the egg as a yolk, and that's kind of the abdomen or stomach region of the fish. So they'll start to develop a tail coming off of the egg, and you'll see that wiggling, and we call them wigglers because they'll still be attached. There's still that stickiness that keeps them attached to that slate, but they'll have little tails just running around. It's kind of funny to look at. Then eventually they'll just start developing into fish. They'll start getting, you know, enough power and enough where they can move enough water where they'll break that sticky, that there's like a string kind of towards the forehead that stays sticky and keeps them attached to whatever the parents decide to stick them to. And eventually they become big enough where they can break that stickiness, and they'll start moving around the tank. Even though you see them moving around once in a while, they might be scooting along the bottom, or they might, you know, make a real quick jump towards the surface and then sort of sink down. They're not free swimming yet. Usually, you'll see when they become free swimming, they'll be in a big swarm kind of together, and they'll be hovering in the water column. Once they become free swimming, then you can feed them. Your survival of your baby angelfish, whether you leave them in with the parents or you raise them artificially, is 100% dependent upon what kind of food you feed them. You're going to hear a whole lot of different things about, well, you can just use crushed flake food, or microworm seems to be a very popular one. I've experimented with just about all of them, and I'm going to tell you what, you're going to get the best results on newly hatched brine shrimp. Yes, it's a little bit of a pain to be constantly hatching out brine shrimp, but it is by far 100% the best food ever to use on baby angelfish, especially within 2 weeks of being free swimming. So once you see them in a big cloud kind of hovering in the water column, then it's time. You know, you actually want to start your hatchery 24 hours before that for your brine shrimp. So you've got 24-hour-old brine shrimp ready for when they're free swimming. And I recommend a minimum of every 12 hours feeding. If you have the room and the space and you can run more than 2 hatcheries, you know, 2 brine shrimp hatcheries, then feel free to feed more. You'll really see these baby angelfish when they're eating that baby brine shrimp. You'll see their stomachs expand, and you can easily tell that they're getting the nutrition they need. And it's by far the best food on the planet for baby angels. Well, I fast forwarded. You can see there's more eggs on the slate, but again, it's just more of the same. They keep making passes like this. We're getting towards the end of what I filmed. This wasn't a particularly huge spawn, but this was typical for this pair. This pair, you know, like I said, they were clockwork every 2 weeks, so the spawns they gave me weren't huge. You know, she didn't have a whole lot of time to develop 1,000 eggs, but they were great. Just every 2 weeks, get a couple hundred new angels. Uh, One of the things they talk about, you know, when people know that I breed tropical fish, is they're like, well, do you make any money out of it, at it? I'm going to tell you right now, no, you're not. Once you take into account electricity and things like that, plus all the food, the money you spent on food, and the money you spent hatching the food, by the time you rear them up to a sellable size, you're going to make pocket change. You're not going to become the next Rockefeller selling angelfish. I'm going to tell you right now. It just ain't going to happen. If you like to do it as a hobby and you find it interesting and you find it fascinating and you like the idea of raising up some fish that were born under your care, then it's a great hobby to get into. But if you're gonna do it for a financial return, you'd have to do it on such a grand scale that it's impossible for the hobbyist breeder to make any actual real money doing this. Yes, you get to sell your fish, and yes, you got money coming in, but that money's only offsetting the money you spent. So, if you're thinking about getting in this for monetary gain, you might want to think about doing something else. That being said, there are some successful hobbyists out there. There are some people that they do this as a business, but I'd be willing to bet that they'll probably tell you the same thing as well. Anyways, thanks for watching. I don't know. I actually recorded this a while ago and wasn't going to post it, but there's a couple people that have been posting on Facebook with a few groups of mine, and it kind of gave me the motivation to post this up here. If you got any questions, again, feel free to ask me. Sorry I probably didn't cover everything you need to know about angelfish care, but like I said, I didn't do this by a script. I'm just kind of shooting from the hip here, so hope you enjoyed it. Later.